Hi, everybody. Welcome to one of our interviews for the Dialogue for the Americas. I have the honor to be joined by Rob Rakowitz. He can correct me in the pronunciation here, from the GARM, which is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. And we're going to learn more about GARM and about their goals in 1 second. So, hi, Rob. Welcome.
Hi, Carolina. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So it was very interesting to discover that lots of advertisers came together for this work around advertising standards online and how content issues impact their marketing strategy, so forth and so on. So I have a couple of questions for you to explain to our audience what are your goals, right, and challenges you are trying to address. So the GARM is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, right? It's a
Yep.
cross-industry initiative established by the World Federation of Advertisers to address the challenge of harmful content on digital media platforms and its monetization via advertising. So what is the origin of GARM, Rob, and who is part of it? And what is this challenge? Can you identify a little bit these
Yeah.
challenges you are trying to address that affect the advertisers?
Yeah, and actually, I'll probably start there first and give a little bit of a historical context, and then that will then sort of create a sense of like the burning platform and why we wanted to change things up. So, the way that media has sort of like grown up historically, whether it's typically it tends to be like broadcast based, and which was about spectrum licenses and engagement with regulators and an understanding of what content sort of safety was. We move over into digital, and you have in the like let's just say early 2000s into the sort of 2010 timeframe, and you have like the growth of multiple websites, and then from sort of like 2010 onwards, you have like the growth of platforms and walled gardens, and what we've seen is sort of just increasing opacity in terms of the marketplace, in terms of where advertisers campaigns would show up. In the very early period of it, where it was like multiple websites, you had things where there were like pirate websites where you would be able to download a full movie and stuff like that, and that was like in the very early days of the internet. And then all of a sudden you had sort of the walled gardens and UGC platforms come up, and what ended up happening over that sort of shift is we ended up as an industry moving over towards buying like direct placements. So much in the way that you would think about TV is like, I want to be on this network, I want to be in this time frame, in this show, and in this ad break, and within this position. That's like the way that TV was typically bought. Now when you go over to digital, it was it allowed us to basically say, okay, I want to buy a particular sort of behavioral or demographic audience. So let's just go over to sort of my former life on, say, Mars. I would want to buy a consumer who buys the candy category but hasn't bought chocolate in, let's just say, the last 2 months. And you would be able to buy them wherever they are on the internet. Now, what ended up happening is that there weren't suitable controls in place to basically check where you would reach that consumer. So you might be able to buy that consumer, that target, easily in terms of an environment, but then you would end up finding them in content that wasn't safe. So would be potentially harmful to society, not necessarily representative of your views. And I think what we ended up starting to see was that the first major sort of incident of this that really caught everybody's attention was in 2017, when the Times of London came out with an expose around YouTube and monetization of ISIS videos. And in that case, you actually have 55 cents of every advertiser dollar going over to the video creator. Then that was like quite literally how ISIS was, milking the advertising industry and
To
taking
get
legitimate
financed.
yeah, and taking legitimate dollars out of industry and putting it towards, terror. And that's actually quite alarming for the entire industry. And Google started to take the right steps. But what we ended up finding out is subsequently, is that there was just a continual stream of incidents, and it wasn't just YouTube alone. It was Facebook, it was Twitter, and what I was sort of confronted by with a few other colleagues at the time was, listen, we can try and solve this problem challenge by challenge, but it really wasn't effective because it was marketer by marketer, platform by platform, market by market. And it was just silly because when you look at it, it's just like the health of, the industry sustainability, but more importantly, societal safety was really being contested by our inability to address this issue holistically. So that propelled me and a few other colleagues to put our heads together, and we started to brainstorm this idea of the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. And we started to um, basically solicit input from significant players within the industry. We pitched it in essence. And thankfully, the executive board within the WFA and the ANA CMO Growth Council both agreed to endorse it jointly. And we launched it at the Cannes Festival of Creativity in June of 2019. I decided to leave my role at Mars and decided to run it full time. That's why we created it. And like you said, it's meant to make sure that there is that basically harmful content is not supported by ads. Now, what we do is we create through a series of working groups, we create solutions. And these solutions are meant to drive transparency, visibility, control, and consistency for the entire industry. So what one person might say is harmful, it varies. But what we've been able to do is run a successive series of workshops and come into a standard and an understanding of what is harmful. And that creates a common meter stick.
That was one of my questions to you, right? That varies so much. And one of the critics around content moderation is exactly this, what harmful means, or even what it's illegal in one country is not in another one. So how do you guys define and dealt with that?
Yeah, so what we were able to do was we were able to look at some existing work that existed in the industry, and we then scaled it up by having advertisers, agencies, as well as platforms iterate on it. And what we agreed is that there are 11 common categories for harmful content. So we have things in there like death, injury, and military conflict, illegal arms and ammunition, hate speech, and incitement. That are, when you look at them, you can probably agree, yes, these are the right category areas. And what we were able to do was agree on a level, a floor in essence, to say advertising support should absolutely not hit here. And then we've agreed different risk levels to make sure that we're not flat out demonetizing all of these subject areas, because something like hate speech, quite honestly, the article of hate speech is it's wrong. It's horrible. We can all agree that it leads to negative outcomes. However, there's discussion of hate speech as sort of a societal trend or an academic discussion of it. There are dramatic portrayals of hate speech in digital content and entertainment. And what we didn't want to do was sort of say categorically, hey, listen, we're going to demonetize it and that there shouldn't be advertising funding for it. So what we've been able to do is almost create a bit of a Dewey Decimal system, or like a industry SKUs, to basically allow individual content to be appropriately categorized, which allows for the platforms to merchandise it appropriately, e.g. get the right advertising content to the right buyer. And then the advertiser in essence, is able to buy the right content that is suitable for them. So you could imagine that like an NGO like Amnesty International might actually want to have an ad placed in content around hate speech and incitement, but obviously have it in a very different way. So if you have to think about like, oh, look, they're doing a fundraising campaign, they could actually get into sort of the right content. So that's really a sort
That's
of what,
very interesting. It's kind of a opposite strategy, right?
yeah,
A lot of people are seeing this, right? And they will see, and a lot of that content does keep engagement
yeah,
high, right? But you can also use on the opposite, hey, this is happening, let's fight against it, right?
exactly. And the you know, the big thing that we have here is that it is an industry meter stick. So what it does is it creates a sort of reference point. Now, for each of the platforms that are in GARM, it is up to them to indicate where are they on that meter stick. So for instance, we have a platform member in Twitter. Adult and nudity and sexual content is one of our content categories. They do allow for consensual adult nudity. And that is a complete, and that is something that we absolutely allow, that, you know, there's, that they have the freedom to operate. We don't impact on that. However, what they do is they will disclose to advertisers, hey, listen, this content is on our platform. However, we don't monetize it. And that's the whole thing, is what we want to have is that complete transparent dialogue. So what we are doing is we are correcting for this opacity that existed within the industry, where brands didn't understand what was happening in the platforms. Brands didn't have control over where their ads show up. So that's fundamentally sort of what we are, the rights that we are restoring within the industry, so to speak.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that. But I would love to go a little bit deeper, right? Another thing you mentioned in your core page, which we can share at the end of in the video later. You say there is a significant fragmentation, right, regarding the definition, interpretation, and subsequent tagging of the media. Related to safety and sustainability of content for advertising purposes. So what does that mean? And like, is this tagging something transparent to the public, right? Is this that, or another thing I was curious, right? One of the ways for content moderation is community policing, right?
Yep.
So it's the user tagging what's wrong and what's right, or what I should be seeing or not, or, right? Especially when you have a lot of contest driven, right? I remember in Brazil, there was a feminist protest, right? And there was a lot of nudity, and a lot of folks took that down, but it was okay for that political context, right? So one, I would love to go a little bit deeper in these differences, especially across borders. And two, is this something that the user has a role or has a voice?
Yeah, sure. So look, from a the way that we look at it is that moderation and monetization are two different topics, right? Monetization is really one where we can have it as a business to business industry conversation, where it's advertisers and agencies with the platforms, and ad tech providers. And that's something where we sort of have a right to sort of define what's suitable for advertising. Now, on the flip side of it, the moderation side, that is really up for the platforms and individual regulators to have in those conversations. So, for instance, you know, in Germany, the content around hate speech and imagery of, say, Nazi Germany is highly regulated, and the platforms absolutely disclose what is automatically blocked in Germany. Much in the way that sort of there is, you know, UK level legislation, there is French level legislation. So that is absolutely sort of appropriate, is for those, for individual governments to have those conversations with the platforms on what is illegal and what is not, in terms of types of content. And we're starting to see that even here in the US, where you know, people are starting to have conversations around, you know, what is safe and what is unsafe speech. And are there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be binary, because I think one of the things that we've been inspired by within the industry is that content moderation doesn't need to be a binary sort of allowed to be on the platform or block. There's also sort of restrictions that can be put in place. And I think that, members like Twitter, members like Facebook and YouTube and TikTok have been doing a good job in terms of flagging content, in the space of, say, disinformation, that has been disputed facts, and sort of making sure that, there is user interaction. So, and or user notice in terms of content that is about to be viewed. Um, so, I think that there is a difference there. So, we as advertisers are not sort of saying, hey, listen, there is a legality, and, this shouldn't be on your platform. Platforms need to be they need to have freedom of operation in terms of their, their own business. And I don't think that a retailer shouldn't be demanding, certain things of how packaged goods or, company works. However, there needs to be transparency, and there needs to be that conversation around supply chain, and consumer safety, and that's really what we're having here, within GARM. So to get, to sort of sum it up, is that, we are focused on monetization. We are focused on making sure that there is an understanding of standards there. And that's really where we see our role starting and stopping as it relates to moderation. Now, you raised the other question of, are these
Of the users, right?
are safety standards user facing? They're not at the moment. And I think that, you could look at sort of like, look, the Movie Picture Association of America, you can look at the ESRB, you can look at sort of similar consumer labeling in, say, the music industry. um, I personally, my long view is that this will probably get there. Will it be our standard, or will it be a moderation standard? I don't know. But look, the idea of giving users more control and notice about the content that they are about to view is something that should be embraced by anybody in media or in advertising.
Thank you for that. I was curious on the user side, right? If you guys are feeling a pressure from users, right? Hey, I should not see an advertisement of Coca-Cola right on a content that is disinformation, right? Or I was just curious about how is this pressure, how is the awareness around these issues?
Yeah, no, and I mean, like, look, the research on that topic about sort of just basically attribution, right? Does a consumer associate a brand with advertising on a social media platform, and harmful content? And the research is, it's a little bit all over the place. So there's, I'll sort of preface it and say that, user association or consumer association of advertising in digital media versus TV it's like, TV is much more sort of easily recognized. It has much more stopping power. Digital video, next level down. And then when you get into like social news feed, it's like basically it's fragments of that. And the research that I've seen, say, from Pew, has the Pew Institute has, said, that, yeah, there is a good handful, something like 40+% of US consumers come into contact with content that they see as harmful. And that, 2/3 of those consumers write it off as sort of the cost of business, so to speak, of free speech. So there is a little bit of an endemic, I would say, complacency from a
Yeah.
consumer perspective. But that's not what's guiding us, and it's not what's guiding the platforms. It's not what's guiding the advertisers. One of the things that we're working on currently is really advanced controls on adjacency. to make sure that brand advertising is not directly around content that they
Can you
see
explain
as
a
being.
little bit what does that mean for our users?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
gents,
So
for
like I
our
mentioned,
listeners, not users.
yeah. So like I mentioned before, this idea of, buying an audience of, consumers who maybe have bought candy but not chocolate. um, and now, okay, well, we were able to say, look, advertising will not support harmful content in that, and let's just make it up that it's in a feed-based environment like a Facebook or a Twitter. Now, with the enhanced control, let's just say that chocolate manufacturer and advertiser would be able to say, I do not want to be around content that in two placements, meaning that there would be almost like there two posts in between, say somebody who would be discussing something like military conflict in, say, Syria and the deaths there, so that they would be able to drive that spatial difference between that content and where their ad showed up. You take this over to topics like disinformation, you take this over to topics like debated and sensitive social issues. It allows brands to determine where they show up online, which is an important aspect and what we need in order to drive the safe experience that we're looking for brands, consumers, as well as the platforms themselves.
No, super interesting, Rob. Thank you so much. And I think we mentioned the platforms, right? And that's like my last question for you. Besides asking your final thoughts and what you hope for the Americas dialogue, and how you think we can all collaborate, really moving this forward, right? I'm sure everybody wants more transparency. So, how it has been the reception of the platforms for all this work? Uh, who are the allies there, right? So
Yeah. So we're very grateful that we have something like, we have roughly 10 media platforms now as part of GARM. We launched with a handful, literally five. You could, and it's now sort of increased and it continues to increase, which is absolutely great. They've been welcoming of the work. They see this as essential, because when we did the original research in our launch, what we found out that the leading pain point for all of the platforms was that there was that massive fragmentation in terms of what was safe. And you would be able to go into one organization and you'd ask one person versus the next one, and they'd be asking for chalk and cheese, totally different things. And it made the platforms, it put the platforms in a very difficult position and almost made it impossible for them to respond. By creating this forum and this effort, what we've been able to do is really figure out what are the key issues, how to scale them up, how to get advertisers to weigh into solutions as they're being developed, and then be able to make sure that it is much more of a customer-centric dialogue. So I'd like to like, the platforms were, just to be very transparent, were skeptical of this effort at first. But now I think that they realize that it's actually been, it's created a lot of value in terms of, one, dialogue, a common set of definitions, shared measures, an understanding of what the oversight needs are in terms of audits, and then, adjacency controls. And I'd like to say that, we've been able to crack a few firsts for the industry in terms of like metrics. And it's been really quite humbling, to see the platforms step into this dialogue. It isn't an easy one, and it's not something where this is, it's not a industry country club and people sort of back, slapping each other on the back. There are some really tough conversations that we have to lean into and recognize that there are some sort of red lines. And we've been able to sort of come to the middle and figure out, like, look, if it's a no, then if it becomes a no, well, how about this way? And it really becomes sort of a room for us to make sure that we get away from these confrontations where it is a hard line, and it's much more about constructive engagement, collaboration, co-creation of solutions that basically enable the better flow of advertising dollars towards content that is good for society, good for users, and good for the platforms. The platforms are in a very difficult place because they have to make sure that they are open for freedom of expression and inclusion. And I think really what we've been seeing since 2016 onwards is this increased awakening that there is a boatload of different tools that can be brought to bear between moderation and monetization that makes the industry safe as well as sustainable.
That's wonderful, Rob, and it's wonderful that the word of order here seems to be co-creation, collaboration, right? And I think that's one of the goals also for the Americas Dialogue. And I just want to congratulate you guys on this effort, and hope to see you in more opportunities during the dialogue. And thank you again for your time.
And thank you very much, Carolina. We're excited to be part of the process.
Thank you.